Good morning, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here, and as Tom has noted, being part of the IIIF community is really exciting. There's so many people willing to share so much information and knowledge, and it's just a great place to be. So last June in Rome, I went to the IIIF conference and I was talking about how we really were trying to integrate scientific information about collections into some sort of platform that could be shared. And from that point, we really started to think about STEM in a more effective way. So there's a lot of information from conservation and preservation science and heritage collections that can be shared and would add value to the content that we have. And right now, we don't have a way to do it. We also wanted a platform that using the image as part of the central component of sharing that information meant that science didn't appear scary, and we could go across the humanities and the scientific communities and make that more accessible. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges initially. As Tom noted in his introduction, one of the great things about IIIF is we can start to share large volumes of data. Right now at the library, when we start doing some of our spectral imaging, I had been banned from some of the servers because I'd taken them down with the volume of data we had on them. So we had to be a little bit careful about who we were talking to get that up and available. And so this seemed like a great opportunity to try to do that. So an example of this, you can see here, for those of you who aren't familiar with spectral imaging, is we take a series of images in different wavebands and it exposes different content from the collection. And that means instead of one RGB image, you have a number of images as part of that image stack. So how do we share the entire stack of images in a way that we can show and expose new content within the collection item? So that was really what we wanted to see, how we could actually do that in a shareable format. The other thing too is that because we do high resolution captures at a 600 dpi and collection items here are not necessarily small, the Geography and Map Division has fantastic collections and often the maps are 5 by 6 feet, and we're doing that at 600 dpi. You can imagine that's a lot of images and a lot of stitching. Plus, we do areas of interest, and then we do a lot of other sections where we expose content and process it to pull out and enhance things that you can't see in the visible region. So this is starting to add up to a lot of information. As you can see, 24 to 30 gigabytes of data. That's a lot of servers to take down. Another example I wanted to note is that what we're trying to do, you saw a quick example from Tom's introduction of other scientific instrumentation. So every instrument we use, we capture different information from. This is actually a high resolution, a magnification image of a piece of paper, which may or may not be of interest to you. But then how do we capture that so we can share that with someone at the British Library who wants to know if they've got the same paper, is it degrading in the same way, or is it from the same time period? So we want to actually start to capture all of the metadata and add that with it as well, look at the different trace metals in terms of why it's degrading, how do we map that across the surface, and how do we capture that. So these are all the types of information that needs to be linked back to the image and shared in a way that exposes it and makes it available to the community. So one of the interesting things also is reaching out to other communities that are working within the STEM environment. And Tom and I gave a Birds of a Feather session at the Research Data Alliance conference in Berlin in March. And we're really gratified when we were showing what we wanted to do in terms of STEM and in terms of sharing scientific images, to find out from them that they realized that they didn't have a consistent way of doing that and wanted a way to be able to work with us. So they encouraged us to move forward and set up a group, interest group on images and interoperability for the STEM community. And so this is something, if you're interested in this, please contact Tom or I, because the more people we have involved, the better it is. The other thing that's really interesting is they are already looking at linked scientific data. So the IUPAC Gold Books, for example, have every scientific formula description in that. And part of what we want to do is not reinvent the wheel, but link to what's already there on the semantic web. And I know Kat Thornton will be doing a great presentation on Friday talking about some of this type of exposure. There's also how do we link to other institutions who already have their own data sets available but want to actually expose them and standardise how they're doing that. So NIST, for example, have all that information and want to look to share that in a more effective and usable, user-friendly, focused way. Another one here too is looking at the International Sample Number, where you can actually barcode and assure the publication reference to the reference samples or that you have used in publishing and make all that available. So linking the component of that to where it comes from, the image of it, the metadata, this is something we really want to take a little bit further. So going back to the cultural heritage example, we wanted to have that object-based component and thinking about some of the challenges of the spatial orientation of where do we locate the point source of a specific different instrument analysis onto the actual image itself. How do we get through some of these challenges that we have? So I'm going to give you a quick example before I show you how we move that into the IIIF framework. So here's something that if you have time down the hallway, the Waldseemüller 1507 world map, the first map to refer to America, which was bought from the German government in 2007 for about $10 million. So we have the first reference to America, and originally this had red grid lines that had faded over time. With the imaging, we were able to bring back those red grid lines, and with further processing, we could really show where they started and stopped. And so this was something we wanted to expose and make available for researchers. As part of that also, we could look at, from the image itself, just taking a pixel sample reference of the red pigments and end up telling you what the plant dye was that was originally made from, historically. And then another interesting component that's been really a nice way segueing and linking more effectively with curatorial and humanities scholars was we could create sort of an algorithm in our processing to recreate what the original woodblock might have looked like. So this is, the woodblock doesn't exist anymore, but this gives us an idea of the sort of incunabular printing technologies and techniques that were used. And we wanted to bring all this information together. So my early rendition of this was, well, if I had a Google map of a document, we could start to click on, link at certain locations, what do the fibre spectra look like, what's the watermark that might be there, some of the other processing and microscopy, inscriptions that have been added, and the other processing of what the rendition of the original printing technique might look like. So working with scholars and colleagues, and I want to say a huge thank you to Glenn Robson, the technical coordinator for IIIF, we then moved this into the IIIF realm. So to start with, we start with our manifest. We brought in the collection item, and in this case it's actually a block book from the 15th century. So on the information button on the right-hand side there, we added in the metadata about the object level itself, and then at that point also added in a short description that for a non-scientist they could understand what the different analyses might be and what information they might add to the collection item. We then added you remember we had those stack of images from the spectral imaging. We put those in as a layer, which meant that you could go from using the colour image as the baseline of the canvas, but starting to look through all of those different layers that we have there. And the beauty of this is that, with the layer component, of course, you can zoom in, but then just start to click through all of those images and start to see the different response of the different materials as we go through the different wave bands, which helps us start to think a little bit more effectively about what are we looking at with the raking, how are those materials printed, what are the different pigments and how are they responding. And then also in the layer adding on any of the processed images, which really helps us understand materially how things are responding. And so we might have, for example, two different pigments that are red that look exactly the same in the visible, but with the quick processing tool here, we can do the pseudo color and really help curators and researchers understand why this collection information and the materiality of that object is important. Then the other way we thought about, and I personally felt was easier, was actually having a slider where you could slide through all of the different wave bands and back and forth and sort of toggle between each of those. And for me, that was a more user-friendly component. So we added that as another way of looking at the images within the IIIF framework. Then to add on the scientific analyses, we added those on as annotation layers, because we found that if you kept adding them on in the layers itself, it was a little bit more challenging to sort of see how that linked back to the actual object. So here, for example, you can see the different coloured boxes. As you hover over the box, you have the description of what that is. And in this case, it was a segue between the science and the humanities to try and make that information more user-friendly to the humanities side and explain what that scientific analysis was without you having to know exactly how to use it and all the science behind it. So in this case, it was a microscope image, and the curator was really interested in how the pigments were applied when this book was printed. So then as we click onto that, the hyperlink, we can then zoom into a full screen of the actual microscope image. Another example of that here is, again, looking at the layering and the application and zooming into that. When we start to look at some of the other analyses, for example, X-ray fluorescence tells us what sort of metals or trace elements might be in the pigment, and that helps us understand and characterize what the pigment could be. In this example, we had a spectra that told us there was copper in it, which meant it was either a verdigris or malachite, and we knew that was from the time period that these were printed, so that helped us know that the provenance was good. And then for the scientists who wanted to really see the spectra just to see for certain, we can click in and add that information as well. And again, we have another one with a lead peak, which helped us indicate red lead, and again we can add in that specific analysis. So this was a really nice way to start to build up the content knowledge of that collection item, add in the scientific, the actual scientific data for people who understood that to look at, but also to make it available to the humanist who really wanted to think about why that might be important, what they didn't know about the collection already, but exposing it through a link back to the actual image itself and adding a new application in terms of the IIIF capabilities. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you'll talk to me if you see me around in the next few days. We really hope to take this further and engage more people in the STEM community, and you can see how it's regardless of whatever STEM discipline people are working in, we can use these same techniques to link and annotate and expose data across an image-based component. Thank you.